Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations about our schools. For a couple of reasons, this is a very unique and special episode. For one, I'm co-hosting with my friend and colleague, Mary Thomas Valens from Braver Angels. I don't usually co-host, but I'm thrilled to be doing it with you. Mary, great to have you join me today.
Thank you.
What is also different about this conversation is that it's a follow-up from a live online event we held with Braver Angels a few weeks ago about California's Ethnic Studies course. I want to provide a little background so you will know why we are meeting today with our guests, Niclole Bernstein and Albert Camarillo. Niclole, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Albert, same to you. Thanks for joining us again.
Like you can, delighted to be with you.
Okay, we'll bring you right back in a moment after I provide a little context for our viewers and listeners. On September 4th, 2025, Mary and I conducted what's called a fishbowl with 8 people about California's Ethnic Studies course. An Ethnic Studies course was supposed to have been a high school graduation requirement starting in 2030, but the funds to prepare schools to teach the course were not provided in this year's state budget. So while the state is not requiring the course, many schools are still offering it, and several school districts like Los Angeles Unified, San Francisco Unified, Oakland Unified have made it a requirement for graduation. Districts in California are entitled to do that if they want. 4 of the 8 people on the panel each had 5 minutes to say why they supported a high school ethnic studies course. The other 4 panelists all had concerns about such a course and each had 5 minutes to say why. By the way, about 300 people registered for the event and many were from outside of California. And since posting the recorded video, nearly 400 people have watched it. Well, near the end of the 2-hour fishbowl, we asked panelists and the audience to share their takeaways. And Al Camarillo, one of the panelists who spoke in favor of ethnic studies and a guest with us today, shared his reflections. Niclole Bernstein, a panelist who had concerns about ethnic studies, thanked Dr. Camarillo for his comments and expressed a desire to connect with him later so she could share more details that lay at the heart of her concerns. We reached out to both of them to see if they would have that conversation with Mary and me for this podcast, and to our great surprise and pleasure, they agreed, which is why we're all here today. Let me just say that my goal and the goal of Braver Angels is for people with different perspectives to listen better, to better understand one another. We usually avoid debate formats because too often the goal in debates is to win, not to better understand one's differences. We want people to continue the conversation, to keep on listening to one another, which is what happened here with Niclole and Al. So first I want to have my co-host Mary Thomas Valens say a bit about Braver Angels and to describe some of the Braver Angels conversation guidelines that panelists were asked to adhere to during the fishbowl. Mary, share a little bit about Braver Angels.
Okay, so Braver Angels is leading the nation's largest cross-partisan volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide and to strengthen our democratic republic. That's a direct quote from the website. The skills I've learned and those that we've shared with teachers and students, administrators, the public at large, have served to give these stakeholders the tools for productive conversation, especially with tough topics. And as I've met from people from across the country and across the political spectrum, our Braver Angels work has really given me hope for bringing people together during these divided times. So I think, Ken, you wanted me to share a few of the key principles of what we call the Braver Way. There's like 4 or 5, but I'm going to just share 3. 1, we state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect, and we welcome opportunities to engage with those with whom we disagree. And our mutual goal is for people from different perspectives to listen and better understand one another. We hope people will continue the conversation. So finally, after all that, let's bring back Niclole and Albert. Niclole, for those who don't know you or did not watch the event from September 4th, please introduce yourself.
Hi, hello again. My name is Niclole Bernstein, and I live in San Diego, here in California. I have been involved in the ethnic studies conversation for about 5 years, and I first became involved in the conversation because anti-Semitism was an issue I was concerned about. I am Jewish. I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and my parents are from Israel. They immigrated to the United States. And a few years later, I was born. So I am the first person in my family to be born here. Both my parents were later naturalized and were very proud Americans. And so, when I was invited to the conversation, it was great because I was, listening, Mary, as you were listing those off, and those are all the same policies and sort of mantras that I live by. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come back. And I'm
Well,
sorry you were so surprised that we would say yes.
uh, well, I was. Well, anyway, how about you, Albert? Introduce yourself also.
Sure. Albert Camarillo, historian of the American experience, now just celebrated my 50th year. Hard to believe, at Stanford University in the Department of History. Considered one of the founders of Mexican American Chicano history and one of the scholars of comparative studies of race and ethnicity in the United States. And I'm delighted to be back with you and Nicole and Ken, so we can continue this engaging conversation, a civil conversation that we need so badly.
Hmm.
Oh, that's great. So, what we're going to do now is ask each of you to summarize the perspectives you shared in the fishbowl. That's what we could have done, but instead, we're going to ask you each to summarize what you recall the other person said. So, we'll start with Nicole. Please share what you recall hearing from Albert and why he supports the ethnic studies course for high school students. And then we will check in and see if Al thinks that that was summarized correctly.
Okay. So Al obviously comes from, the background of teaching Chicano studies and ethnic studies, and he believes that students in K-12 should be able to see themselves in the curriculum, should be able to learn about the different ethnic minorities that are usually not covered in other courses and classes where they wouldn't normally be exposed to, and that ethnic studies helps students do better in class and know more about themselves and their peers, and that it is sort of a positive way to engage in communities where you don't necessarily have a lot of information about personally.
Okay, so Al, how did you react to that? Did she summarize you
Great.
accurately?
That's a good summary. I think the only other thing I would add, Nicole, is that towards the end of my comments, I made the statement that I think in our current day, in our contemporary society, particularly in California, as one of the most multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious places on the face of the earth, ethnic studies can also play an important role in this incredibly diverse uh, group of students in our public schools, learning about one another and appreciating difference so that we can maybe in the future have a democratic, multiracial society that is efficient and functional rather than the opposite.
Okay, so Albert, this is your time to summarize what you remember hearing from Nicole. In her case, she had concerns about ethnic studies.
Well, I really appreciated the way, Nicole, the way that you started your statement, indicating that you understood the value, the basic value of ethnic studies and could appreciate it, but that appreciation turned to concern when you began to hear reports and investigate it further of anti-Semitism and other things that were discriminatory, certainly in the larger society, but in certain classrooms that were incorporating or having exposure to ethnic studies. And that's problematic. And she stated that, and I absolutely agreed with that statement.
Okay, so Nicole, did he summarize your thoughts accurately, and what would you want to clarify?
Yes, that is very accurate. I think the only thing that I would add is that my concerns actually deepened the more I learned about ethnic studies in its original intended form, and started to really engage with educators and people inside the districts, administrators inside the districts, the school districts, who were really pushing for implementing it and seeing sort of the mismatch, I guess, between what I was led to believe or what I believe was the intent of the mandate and what is actually showing up. And so instead of, as I dug deeper, instead of clarifying and feeling better about things, I actually started to feel worse the more I learned about it. So that's something I would love to be able to explore today, especially with an expert like Albert. So that's one of those things that I think is misunderstood very often by people who have concerns.
Great, and we're going to come back and dig into what some of those concerns are. You answered a question I was going to have for both of you, and that question was: has your thinking changed at all since that online discussion we had on September 4th? And Nicole, it sounds like your concerns are deepened a bit, and since then. But I wanted to ask you, Al, if has your thinking changed at all based on what you heard from other people on the September 4th?
Well, Ken, it actually reinforced my concern about there's such misinformation. There are people taking positions with limited information about the whole ball of wax, if you will. And Nicole, I laud her for this, is willing to open up and understand and get more information. And I think that's the way that we have to handle policy concerns, because this is a policy concern, an educational policy concern, but we should do it with the full array of information. And then if we decide to differ in our opinions and our arguments, that's understood, but let's do it from the foundation of knowledge rather than stereotypes or preconceptions. And that's why I was eager to have this conversation with both you and Mary and Nicole, because I think this represents the way we can start sorting things out so that people have a better understanding about what this ethnic studies curriculum is about.
So what I'd like to do now is I want to play for our listeners and for both of you a clip from that 9-4 exchange. And at the near the end of the 2-hour conversation with 8 people, I asked for people to share their takeaways from the discussion. And so what we're going to hear is your response, Al, to that question. And then right after that, Nicole, you come in and respond to what Al said. So we're going to listen to that now, and then we'll continue from there, because I think that'll open us up to have the more in-depth, detailed discussion that we're hoping for today. So let me play that.
One takeaway: there is no room in any classroom for discrimination. And when it's found out, when it's discovered, it's called out. But to generalize, to have broad stroke statements about a very diverse curriculum now being taught literally by hundreds of students, got to be very careful about the generalizations made. That broad stroke define something that is really a curriculum that is emerging. It's being taught by our teachers now. There'll be more in the future. And if you have an opportunity, and I would say this to everyone that's listening, if you have an opportunity to connect with a teacher who's teaching ethnic studies, reach out to them, because you need to see what's being actually taught the pedagogy, the nature of the curriculum, and the impact of students. And I'm seeing a lot of that now as I reach out to teachers at school districts, not only in the Bay Area, but now increasingly throughout California. And let that be the basis for you making determinations about this curriculum. And that is someone, yes, I support it, but is someone that is seeing the best of what teachers offer, and we've heard from some of them today. This is something our society critically needs right now, to be able to have students and future adult citizens of our state and our country to be able to interact. And if we can give them the kind of information that allows them to process things, to see people differently, but to understand and respect them, because that's critical, right? That's the foundation of ethnic studies in an important way from its origin to today. That's the takeaway for me.
Can I just thank Albert for that comment? And I wish that you were this standard, right? But I have to be honest with you. And this is maybe something I would love to connect with you offline and show you my experience and what my community is dealing with, and why there's so much pain and hurt about the curriculum's origin, about how it's manifesting in classrooms. I really don't think that there's an understanding in the general population, because the Jewish population is less than 2% of California, of the country. We're a tiny little minority. I think the only marginalized group that is smaller than us in numbers is perhaps the indigenous Native Americans. And so I would welcome an opportunity to really connect with you, but for real, and share what I'm experiencing in my community, so that we can figure out how we can move forward, so that everybody wins.
So it would be a great time now, Niclole, for you to share what you're experiencing in more detail, and then after that you can respond to that. So this would be a great way to now continue the conversation between the two of you.
For real, though, right?
Yes, for real.
Yes, thank you. So, listen, this is one of those interesting things that, as an American, first generation American, who comes from such a teeny tiny minority, and a marginalized minority, the promise of ethnic studies for the Jewish community was almost like, I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic here, but it was like the first time anyone ever seemed to care about what our experience really was. And it was something that I think, I mean, across the full range of the Jewish experience, and there are many, right? And that's what is also so very interesting, is that, when we talk about the Jewish community, even though we're this teeny tiny community, we're as diverse as a Jewish community as the United States is diverse as a country. And I make that analogy very intentionally, and I'll discuss that in a second. But what we had hoped was that a little bit of our story and of our contribution to not only California, but also to the United States of America. Why were Jewish people coming here as early as, the 1700s, right? And it was this promise of us not being discriminated against because we were different. It was, this freedom of religion, this freedom of speech, this freedom to practice and be whatever you could be or wanted to be without stigma. And that is why so many Americans of Jewish descent are still Americans of Jewish descent, right? I don't know that very many people outside of the Jewish community know all that much about our story before that. I don't know that anybody knows why there are, Jews who came from Europe why are there Ashkenazi and Mizrahi? Like, there's a lot of interesting nuances that I don't think anybody knows about. And so this idea of ethnic studies being something that we could participate in sharing our story was huge. Then what we saw coming out of it was a total opposite representation of what the Jewish experience is. There were key parts of our Jewish identity, for example, Zionism, which were totally misrepresented and given a completely opposite definition of, and then taught as truth without any basis, no facts, no nothing. And it was very frustrating. And so we had this very, very high hope for ethnic studies being a vehicle for us to finally share a little bit about where we come from and who we are. And then it basically became something that was used to discriminate against us, to harm us, to libel us, to other us, to blame us. And it was so hurtful that, many of us couldn't really understand why it was so intense. And Albert, this is really why I was so eager to speak with you, because I did not get the sense from you that this was how you felt or how you believed. And I needed someone to help me understand how that happened. How did the anti-Zionist ideas infiltrate ethnic studies, which was supposed to be about uplifting and learning about and celebrating differences? How did it become something that was one of the most discriminatory curriculums for me, my community, my people, my family, my children? My children go to public school here in San Diego. And it was quite terrifying to see how things flipped and how we became the community to blame for so much of what is wrong in the world today. Somehow we became the scapegoats yet again. And it was just history repeating itself in the worst possible way. And I just really need to understand. Maybe you can help me, because I did go back and look at the origins of ethnic studies, of the Third World Liberation Front, of, this idea of liberation, liberatory pedagogy. I learned a lot about it. And it somehow became this vehicle for ultra anti-Jewish ideas to be taught as fact.
Nicole,
And
just
very
before
hurtful.
Al responds, could you just give an example or two of what that looks and sounds like in a classroom?
Sure. So whenever the idea of colonialism, which is, sort of depicted in ethnic studies as one of the, sort of like the ills of our society, of the modern world, is that colonialism really destroyed indigenous people. And by the way, here's an example of colonialism: the Zionist entity these Jews from Europe who came and stole land from the indigenous people, Palestinians, and have now genocided an entire population in like this, this white supremacist movement to create a modern state of Israel. That is it is in every single ethnic studies class. It actually goes beyond ethnic studies because it's like embedded in the education system. And we can talk about that as well. There are many examples. I mean, there are 12 different lawsuits in California right now against school districts who used ethnic studies to discriminate against their Jewish students and teachers. By the way, Jewish teachers also are being discriminated against. And it's really troubling because I don't see in classrooms examples of ethnic studies teachers, Al, who prescribe to your version. And I don't understand why. And I need you to help explain
Al,
why.
I would love to hear your response. Thank you so much for that, Nicole.
It's so disturbing, Nicole, that we've had some schools and some teachers that have actually taken and really distorted, given our contemporary horrible situation in the Middle East, the Israeli, Palestine, Hamas conflict, that it's been brought into the classroom within a context of ethnic studies, which is so difficult to do. And when it becomes discriminatory, it is so disturbing to me. I mean, it's antithetical to those of us that started ethnic studies 50 years ago. And I was one of those people as a graduate student at UCLA 5 decades ago. And over the course of the last 5 decades, building that curriculum and working with teachers. It's also disturbing, Nicole, and and Ken and Mary, and this has been tracked. There's increasing anti-Semitism, not only in California, but across the United States. The incidences of anti-Semitism are on the rise, again, fueled by what's happening in the Middle East, but it's on a foundation of existing historical and existing anti-Semitic attitudes. It can't be tolerated. It has to be called out, and it has to be taken out, certainly taken out of the curriculum. But I will tell you this. I've had extensive contact with teachers that are teaching ethnic studies. I think I mentioned it in the first program. I brought to Stanford this summer an ethnic studies workshop for Bay Area high school teachers, and there were 12 teachers representing 11 different schools across the Bay Area, and none of what they are teaching even gets close to, in fact, antithetical to what you've experienced, Nicole. Now, that's not to say the examples that you've identified, they're real. I've seen them. I've seen reference to them. I've read articles about them, and they are deeply troubling. And I understand absolutely why the Jewish community is saying this cannot be tolerated. It can't be tolerated. But you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Because and I would love to bring you up to Stanford and have you meet these teachers, Nicole, because it would resuscitate this really positive initial idea and value that you had about ethnic studies, because it's the way I see a model curriculum that's being offered already in California that allows our students, our incredibly diverse group of students across the state, to begin to understand one another better. And heaven knows we need that understanding perhaps now more than certainly any other time in my lifetime. So there are those incidents out there. There are some teachers. There are some school districts that have approved certain curricula, but I know that the majority are not promoting an anti-Israeli or anti-Jewish curriculum.
So can I just to clarify one thing? The rise in anti-Semitism that we're seeing in this country and actually across the world, you said was because of what was going on in the Middle East. Like you sort of correlated it with what's happening in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the sort of reason why we've been seeing such a huge rise.
No, just let me clarify. It's
Right.
not the reason. It basically adds yet another complicated level to historic anti-Semitism in this country and around the world.
Okay. Yes. So I think maybe, again, one thing that I still don't really understand is, and I believe you, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. Zionism has been misdefined by many people since 1975, actually, since November, specifically 1975, when the UN resolution 339 something was passed that said Zionism equals racism. Is this something that is a core tenet of ethnic studies, to teach about Zionism as a colonial, settler colonial oppression topic? Like, is that part of what ethnic studies was supposed to be?
No, it is not. And I can tell you that again from working with teachers. I just we just completed, and I'll send you this report, and Candidates Mary as well. We canvassed all the teacher education programs in the state of California. These are the programs that certificate and grant degrees to our teachers. And there's not a hint of that in any of the curricula in these teacher education programs. Now, we asked about the basic question of ethnic studies about the four major groups, right? We didn't ask about Jewish studies, but I looked at their websites, and there's nothing to indicate in the curricula offered that has an anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist component. But it doesn't mean it's not going to seep in. If there are people that are politically tied to using that as an example, both contemporary and historical, there's nothing we can do about that, right? But it is problematic. It is problematic when you expand it and use it as a basis for talking about discrimination. But your point, I'll mention this too, though. So there are certain concepts in the origins and evolution of ethnic studies. You mentioned one of colonialism. Now, that is still a very important part of ethnic studies, the origins of ethnic and racial diversity in American society, as would be structural inequality. So those things are important that teachers are incorporating into their curriculum in ways that high school students can understand that. But anti-Zionist perspectives in the curriculum are really problematic.
And could I just throw one thing into the mix here that is alluded to a little bit before about what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, but there is a debate going on about among Jews and among Christians, among Muslims and among people around the world about whether the way that the Israeli government right now is responding to the horrific events of October 7th, a couple of years ago, whether that is appropriate or not. And I just wonder from both of your perspective, is there a place either in ethnic studies or in social studies classes and history classes, current event conversations for students and teachers to have conversations where they can say, this is what I'm thinking about that conflict. This is my opinion. I hear people, prominent Jews who are very critical of the Israeli government. I hear other Jewish people that support it. Is there a place in school where those conversations could and should happen?
Well,
Nicole,
going back to Mary's comment earlier in the program about the likelihood of high school students, if we take that cohort, of somewhere in some social studies or history class, or maybe an ethnic studies class, that will say, "Oh, I heard about what's going on in and as Israel is taking over Palestine," and so I think teachers and school districts should equip themselves to at least have students be able to sort out a really incredibly complicated historical and contemporary conflict so that there's some basic understanding without just taking a side and saying, "Oh, I'm right and you're wrong." I mean, that's what we want to avoid. And in this our contemporary society that is so fractured, so contentious, so difficult, the polarization, we have to lead with compassion. We had to lead with sensitivity. We have to lead with information so that we can talk to one another and engage one another and maybe not persuade to change your arguments, but at least to be able to understand one another and not just dismiss you because you don't agree with me.
So
Thanks,
I
Albert.
just wanted to add something. You know, being mainly elementary school, I have not had ethnic studies training, but I've had training in teaching kids to think critically. And one of the things I would do if that happened in a classroom, bringing up something, you know, where did you get your information? What other information is there that would give you you know, perhaps a different perspective? And even with 10 and 11-year-olds, I did this, and sharing that issues are complicated, that we can't put them in a soundbite or a Facebook post. Um, and also that how can I find out what questions can I ask to make sure I'm getting the right information? And I think if ethnic studies, not knowing the nitty gritty of it like you do, Al, or Nicole, because you've explored it, of getting kids to ask questions and say, you know, what can we believe? Why can we believe that? And how can we check to make sure what we believe is true? And then also, one thing I'll just mention with Braver Angels, when we have conversations about an issue and people share, this is my view of the issue, we ask them, why do you support that issue? And then, like we did, I think, in the fishbowl, we ask, now take your own view. What missing links might you have, or what unintended consequences may come from your view? So, to get kids, everybody, to analyze the fact that you can't put things in tiny little boxes, that we need to ask lots of questions, and we have to have the humility to know that we may not have all the answers and we need more information. So I'm wondering if that would help, if that were the key to teacher training in ethnic studies, and perhaps it is.
Nicole, love to
If I
hear.
could, yeah,
Love to
if I
hear
could
your
just go
thoughts.
back to Ken's question, because it that in and of itself could be, you know, its own
Yeah.
almost like series of podcasts, but I'm really gonna try to, you know, kind of be concise. So yes, there are a lot of examples of how you can talk about Israel and what is going on there in a way that is not anti-Semitic. And I often joke that if you have ever met Israelis, you will know that literally the national pastime is like talking about the government and criticizing the government of Israel. That's what Israelis do. It's like everybody does it. It doesn't matter what side of the, you know, spectrum you are. Now, what happens is when it crosses into anti-Semitism is when I guess you apply one of the, you know, the delegitimization of the country's right to exist, demonization of everything that Israel does, no matter what it is, and a double standard that you wouldn't hold any other country to. So I would ask, how are we teaching about the Pakistan-India conflict over Kashmir in ethnic studies classes? And the answer is we're not. No one is. There's not I don't know of any examples of that being taught. Why not? California has a large Hindu community, a large Pakistani community. You know, they are tremendously impactful in all areas of, you know, study and universities and research and business. And yet there's nothing really about that issue. Whereas the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is so ubiquitous, you would actually imagine that is the most important and the biggest conflict that's happening around the world for the last 80 years. I can talk to you all day long about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I just don't know if any of that really belongs in a 9th grade English ethnic literature class or you know, a social studies class in 6th grade. I don't understand the obsession with that conflict when every other conflict on this planet is basically ignored, that I feel has
I would just say
relevance.
My thought, and I'd love to hear you, Alice, just that in the news, I think the geopolitical ramifications of that conflict and all the other countries surrounding it, the potential for an expanded war, America's own strategic interests in what happens there, like Ukraine and Russia is in the news all the time. And I would think that students should be interested in those conflicts and how it's playing out, and they might have opinions about what America's response should be. And It's confusing right now. It's unclear which country we're supporting. And I think just as an educator myself, to do what Mary talked about, which is to help students think about it. Not to tell them what to think, but how to think about it, where their information, as Al so critically pointed out, are we basing our opinions on valid information? What are the sources of it? Is a really important opportunity. And I would say an obligation of schools in the right place in the right time. I don't know if ethnic studies course is the right place, but we talk about, and I think all of us grew up and we had time to talk about current events. We discussed history. We took history classes that brought us up to present day and the conflicts. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a really, really big conflict with really important implications for the future of our country and the rest of the world. So with that, I'd love to hear what you have to say about whether these kinds of conversations belong somewhere in the K-12 classroom, Al.
We are putting such enormous pressure and creating such challenges for our teachers already. Um, I mean, I know well because all of my family members are in education. We call it the family business, and many of them are public school teachers or have been. So I know firsthand how difficult it is for teachers to get by, right? And then we have to be careful what we have as expectations, whether it be ethnic studies teachers or American history teachers or social studies teachers, what they can be prepared to teach, and how can we, and you mentioned this earlier again, how do we prepare them to be able to handle questions, as Mary mentioned as well, when they come up in our classroom. So it's a tall order, it's a complicated thing, and we have to do more right now as we talk and in the future to equip our teachers with the best possible resources and ways to think about questions that are going to arise in their classrooms from their students, and as best we can for those ethnic studies teachers to realize these conversations might be brought up. Are you going to engage them, and if so, how?
Mhm.
And if it's an opportunity for our young people to learn something, then engage it. If it's something that you feel you're not ready to be able to engage with, don't touch it. So let's think about our teachers and the difficulty that they have in being able to bring that curriculum to our students.
But
So,
Al, that's actually exactly the point of why people like me don't feel that it's fair to put such a gigantic onus on K through 12 teachers. The amount of material that they have to be able to cover with content standards that already exist is so complicated. And then you added in the fallout from COVID and the learning loss, and that they had to then come up with new ways to try to help kids who had fallen behind. And now there's this mandate, or was, this idea of this mandate to add even more on top of that. Seemed to me so unfair, not just to the teachers, but by the way, also to the district administrators. There was no real support given by the state for this mandate. It was just sort of thrown at them. It was super vague. It's like no one really understood what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to do it. Parents were freaking out. Like it was like the most gigantic mess. I still don't understand why it's so important to have ethnic studies in K through 12, right?
Well,
5-year-olds, right?
Like,
this was a high school.
yeah,
High school.
I want to clarify that. This is a high school single course. When I brought up my fifth grade classroom, it was, I can't control the questions students are going to bring to me. So, I actually had a student who came from Somali, and there's a lot of conflict there. She asked about it. What do I know about it? I said, I know very little. I wanted, though, to make her feel heard. So I think we need to be very clear. Ethnic studies is not embedded in K-12 education.
But it is actually.
Cultural awareness and sensitivity really needs to be a part of every teacher education. Now I'm sharing my opinion rather than facilitating, so I'll stop.
But this isn't. But that's an opinion that I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but like, I actually really agree with that. The thing is that there are laws already in place. I mean, since 2011, we've had a law in California that requires all books, in even in elementary school libraries, to be inclusive and to share stories and to have their sort of more cultural sensitivities. Which, I mean, if you don't support that, I don't know what kind of part of society you're in. But reasonable people all want that.
I understand that, Nicole, and I will add this last historical connection to today. 100 years ago, the composition of American society had been transformed as a result of immigration from Europe in particular, but from Asia and Latin America as well. And American educators came together after World War I, mostly in the 1920s and 1930s, and said, we have to prepare all of these students, like you now and me, the products of immigrants, right? We have to prepare them to become good Americans. So we're going to create a curriculum that talks about American values and ideals and democracy and how to be a part of this nation. I would argue, and I agree with you about the essentials, the key things of reading comprehension and math comprehension. But in our current day and age, 100 years after those progressive leaders, educators, and legislators called for this change in American educational curriculum, I would say that message applies to us equally importantly today, because we need to be able to have our students understand the diversity of their student body, of their students in their schools, in their classrooms, their communities. If we're going to have a chance in this 21st century, this contentious 21st century, of having any possibility of building in the state of California, which is really a model right now, whether it's going to work or not, of equipping them so that they can begin to live together peacefully and respectfully. And for me, that cuts to the core of ethnic studies as being as important as math and reading. And that's my end
I
statement.
agree. But so that's why it's so hard for me to understand why we're not seeing that when it comes to my community. My community is actually more ostracized today than it was 50 years ago.
So Nicole, let me ask you and Al, before you go out, just very briefly, one step you think we can take to go forward with respect to ethnic studies. Now, it may be, Nicole, that you say, well, let's just not do it at all. But is there a step that we could take going forward where, as you had said, where we all win, and it's a good thing for all Americans? And then I'll ask you the same question, Al, and then we'll bring it to a close.
So yes, I do think there is a way forward. I think that being able to audit and ensure that the content standards and the materials that we have currently for social studies, for English, and for other subjects in K through 12, and I am talking about K through 12, really does reflect the beautiful diversity and the amazing contributions of all, not just white, what's it called, Eurocentric, right? California would not be what it is today without every single minority that's ever been through our borders here, contributing and making sure that our curriculum, starting from the very youngest age 5, is like really explaining and showing how we got here because of all of this beautiful diversity that has come and contributed and formed, sort of this fabric of the state and also of the country. And we do it in a way that it doesn't add such a huge amount of stress and onus on teachers currently to learn a whole new thing and a whole new way of doing things. But like, let's make sure that we are incorporating those stories from very young, so that there's no issue with our children growing up in California not being celebratory of other ethnic groups.
Okay. And Al, one thought you want to share about a possible way forward with this?
Keep an open mind, gather as much information as you can, and let's see if we can build a curriculum that in years ahead, when these conversations take place, we will not have people saying there's discrimination that's being taught in the classroom. But in fact, my children are learning, my grandchildren, I'm hoping that will be the case, all in California, some in San Diego, Nicole, because I have a son down there with three beautiful daughters. That they will be able to take the best of what is American studies, American government, American history, and ethnic studies, and be able to inculcate that in their being and get along with people in a way that past generations of Americans have not.
Well, thank you for Al so much for that, and Nicole. So I just, in closing, I want to, on behalf of my co-host, Mary Thomas Valance, I want to thank you for tuning in, all our listeners and viewers. Special thanks to you, Nicole, and you, Al, for having the courage to meet again with each other and with us, and to listen to one another and to keep this important conversation going. You can find this and all of our episodes of Courageous Conversations at schoolconversations.org and wherever you get your podcasts. It will also be on our YouTube channel. You will find the full link to the full video that we recorded back on September 4th as well, if you want to see the original conversation we had. So with that, I want to thank all of you, thank our listeners for tuning in. Bye, everyone.